Welcome to our new series, where we are diving deeper into songwriting and production with plenty of examples from K-pop. But first, we have to cover some of the basics.
Chords are the backbone of songwriting. A chord progression sets the mood and, in many cases, inspires the top line and even the arrangement. Maybe you've heard sentences like, "The song is in A minor," but what does this actually mean?
For this, we need to look at two things first, keys and scales, which, yes, are two different terms. So, what is a scale?
A scale is simply a mathematical pattern consisting of intervals. For example, this is the mathematical pattern for the major scale. Don't worry, unless you're sitting an exam, you don't have to memorize this instantly.
Keep in mind that this is how we teach music in the West. There are other ways to understand music, but we can look at those another time.
Now, we can't really do much with a scale by itself, since it's literally just a mathematical pattern. In order to use a scale, we need to pick a key. For example, C. This essentially means that if we start applying the mathematical rules of a scale, for example the major one, from the note C onwards, we'll end up with what is called a C major scale. And this scale we can now actually play and, more importantly, build melodies and chords with.
You might wonder why you need to know the difference between a key and a scale at all, but the answer is very simple. The fact that the key essentially defines the starting point of a mathematical pattern means that we can also simply just shift the key around as we want, while the mathematical pattern stays the same. This is why we can build any scale on top of any note key. This will come in handy later in this series when we are starting to build chord progressions, as we can simply change the key without actually changing the progression.
Okay, so how do we get from a scale to chords? Well, to put it real simple, by counting. Yes, really. Let's move to piano roll view, as this will be most practical for music production. This is indeed the view we see in music production software.
A chord, in its basic form, also known as a triad, consists of 3 notes as the name suggests. Which 3 notes? If you wanted to build the first, also known as the root chord, in C major, you would pick the 1st, 3rd and 5th note of the scale. But what about the other chords? It's actually the same. So you pick a note, for example E, then skip a note, and then skip a note again. We need to stress that we mean the notes from the scale here, and not all the notes.
Now we have 2 chords. Let's hear them and think whether you notice a difference between them. As you can hear, the C chord sounds quite uplifting. We call this a major chord, so this chord's full name is C major. The E chord, on the other hand, is rather somber. We call this a minor chord, and the chord you just heard is E minor. Finally, if we build a chord on B, we get this very tense sound. This is a diminished chord, in this case B diminished. The names of these chords refer to what we call chord quality. There are a few more, but we'll look into them in the future as they're a little bit more complicated.
As you can notice, in C major the root and the 3rd are 4 semitones apart, and the 3rd and the 5th are 3 semitones apart. This will apply for any other major chord. We have the opposite pattern in our minor chord. Finally, in diminished chords, the root and the 3rd and the 3rd and the 5th are 3 semitones apart each. You can use these little formulae to construct any major, minor or diminished chords.
If we build out all the chords of the C major scale, we'll get these. But remember what we said about the scale being a mathematical pattern? Regardless of the key we pick, the sequence of major, minor and diminished chords will be the same, just shifted. Let's look at some example songs which use the major scale in various keys.
Let's dance the night away. You're my celebrity. 잊지 마, 넌
So far, we have covered the major scale, which had major, minor and diminished chords. But there are other scales we may choose. As you might have been able to tell, the major scale is often perceived as rather upbeat and happy sounding. But what if we wanted a song which is sad, or maybe even dark?
An important interlude. There are multiple types of major and minor scales. The major scale we already looked at is also known as Ionian mode, but usually people would understand what you mean even if you just say major scale. The minor scale we're about to look at is known as the Aeolian mode or the natural minor scale, and we will use the key of A. If this is sounding a bit confusing, don't worry. We'll look at some other minor and major scales in another video.
So how do we build the chords in this scale? The exact same way as before. However, as the notes are now differently spaced from each other, we will end up with a different sequence of chords. And here are some examples which use a minor scale across various keys.
Pulling me deeper and deeper, I try to get out but I can't stop. 난 마치 꿈에서 꿈을 꾼 듯이 널 찾아서 헤매다.
Let's summarize what we've looked at so far. We discussed the difference between scales and keys, we looked at major and minor scales, and we discussed what chords they contain and what chord quality is. Finally, we worked out the basic formula for building major, minor, and diminished chords.
So we pick a scale and a key, and then we use chords from the key to make a song? Well, pretty much, but which chords and in what order? So far, we've looked at the quality of chords. But in order to answer these questions, we will also need to look at the function of chords. And that's exactly what we're going to look at in the next video. Make sure to subscribe to not miss out on that video, and also let us know any questions in the comments down below. And if you want to work with us, get in touch. Infos are in the description box below.